Okay.
其实现在是在倒数，对吗？
对，现在在倒数。
That's the countdown, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
the countdown.
good.
Read out.
You still got 2 minutes to scroll your phone.
Okay, share this.
YouTube 30秒 ，YouTube 要30秒，还有2分半。大家可以聊天，大家可以聊天。
好，
是。
我交代一下。
主持人也可以说我们还有几分钟，还有几分钟。
好哦，现在还有大概2分钟。对，然后等一下我可能会先跟议员大概稍微聊比较闲话家常。We will chat a little bit about the past 2 days. Mr. Butikofer, his experiences in Taiwan, and then we'll go directly into our topics. Yeah, and we would like the atmosphere to be a little bit relaxing, not that strict. Yeah, although our topic is actually quite tough. So we'll see how it goes. I would also like to know for our reporters, would you like to directly ask questions during our Q&A session, or when we end our live stream, you want to talk directly to our MEP? After the session. Okay, sure. Sure.
Thank you.
这样可以吗？这个声音好。
大家可以开始分享这个链接了。好，现场直播还有1分钟。
好，谢谢。
Okay. How was the coffee?
How was the typhoon?
You're much welcome.
现在30秒。
Have jet lag.
Okay. If you need to refill, we can refill it like maybe 1 hour later.
Okay.
Sure.
我们有个500亿。
好。
看到画面就可以讲话。好。
All right.
就
开着好了，没关系。
10秒。
虫虫，你要坐进来吗
？8。
他就这样了。
6、5、4、3、2。
嗨，大家下午安啊！我们是台湾绿党。那这一次很荣幸的，我们可以邀请到来自欧洲议会的Butikofer 议员。那等一下呢，我们全程主要会是以英文来进行。但是各位如果要提问的话，你们也可以使用中文、英文都可以。那我们就是会有绿党的小编来帮忙看一下这样子。好，那就先让大家心里有一个底，就是说，因为议员他其实过去2天在台湾行程也非常紧凑，然后他其实每次来台湾都一定找我们啦。那我们最近是6月也才刚跟议员在韩国相见这样子，对，就是所以其实他希望说我们这一次可以轻松一点，然后大家可以聊聊天，有什么问题尽管问，他有办法回的会回，没有办法的呢，他也会很诚实的跟各位说这样子。好，那接下来我可能就是要把这个音频转成英文，那就是请大家接下来享受我们接下来1个小时的我们整个的座谈。Hello everyone, I'm Secretary General of Green Party Taiwan, and today it's it's our honor to invite MEP Reinhard Butikofer, sorry for my pronunciation, and also our co-convener Zoe Lee.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. It's very happy that we gather here because actually in June we already meet up in Korea for Global Greens Congress, the 5th one, and they both give presentation and talks about an issue that later we are going to talk about. And because MEP Butikofer, he has been here in Taiwan for 2 days, so maybe we can begin with your experiences for the past 2 days. And then we'll go directly into our topic. So would you like to introduce a little bit about you and share with us? Thank you.
Well, certainly. Thank you, first of all, for having me. It's a pleasure. It's not the first time that I'm meeting with Taiwan Greens. When I first came to the island in 2018, we already met. The last 2 days, I've been here visiting together with a delegation of the European Parliament's Foreign Relations Committee. And we have had occasions to have a large number of very interesting meetings. We met with the President, we met with the Foreign Minister, with Minister Tang, with the Mainland Affairs Office, with ITRI, the innovation outfit. We met with the presidential candidate of the Kuomintang, Ho Yo-i. We met with Vice President Lai, who is DPP's candidate. We intended to meet with Ko Wen-je, but he sent his advisors. We also met some European interlocutors that represent our EU nations here in Taipei. And the most important topics for our visit were, of course, cross-strait relations, also EU-Taiwan trade and investment relations. I think those two issues stood out. And this was the first such visit from the European Parliament's Foreign Relations Committee. So it was in a way historic maybe, but it's become a regular practice for the European Parliament to send different official delegations to Taipei.
This time's the first time?
It was the first time for this committee.
Okay.
In the end of 2021, there was a committee visiting that deals with foreign interference and information manipulation.
Oh, okay.
And they were very happy to learn a lot. That was also a topic, by the way, for this visit, and we met with some NGOs like Doublethink Lab or AI Lab, and that was very impressive, the kind of work that they presented. The second committee to visit was end of last year, the Trade Committee, and now it's been the Foreign Relations Committee. And that is making a point that we really want to make very clearly, namely that as China undercuts the stability in the Taiwan Strait and the status quo, we want to enhance support for a safe future for Taiwan's democracy.
Can I go a little bit deeper about the support here? Because we know that it's almost impossible that we can compare our force to China, and China always try to strengthen that. So from the point of view of European Parliament or even Germany, what do you think the stronger support mean here in this context?
It does mean that we very clearly express our stringent opposition against any unilateral change of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, including in particular through the use of force or the threatening with force. It also implies that we support meaningful participation of Taiwan in different international organizations like the WHO or ICAO or the UNFCCC or Interpol. And it means that we enhance contacts on different levels, in different dimensions. People to people, cultural contacts, cooperation and exchange of experience with regard to fighting back against foreign interference. I think there's a wide scope of activities that we can pursue, and it is important to note that in this regard, the European Parliament is very united. So the 5 major democratic groups in the European Parliament, the European People's Party, they're center-right, the Social Democrats, they're center-left, the Liberals, the Greens, and the Conservatives all work together in the support of Taiwan.
Okay. Okay. And just to mention about Zoe's presentation last time, because we happened to talk about how do we work together to kind of remain the security and safety here across Taiwan Strait. And for Taiwanese, from what Zoe last time shared is about Mingfang, about
self-defense.
Self-defense. So maybe Zoe can give us a little bit about your point of view.
Observation.
Observation, okay.
I think talking about self-definition, because we are fully aware about the tension and the threat from China, but from the perspective of non-violent political party. So like talking about self-defense would like be focused on energy self-efficiency and food self-efficiency. But there'll be a lot of people talking about energy efficiency, and they'll say, okay, Taiwan's short of all kinds of natural energy, like we don't have fossil fuel, we don't have gas, so the nuclear power will be the solution. They'll even quote saying, like now European Council saying, Parliament saying, nuclear the one kind of renewable energy. So I think that's not the truth. So I'd like to ask.
Well, nuclear issues have been contentious in the European Parliament ever since we were first represented there, which was in the year 1989. We have consistently advocated for a non-nuclear future of our European energy supply, but the matter of the fact is that this is by no means consensual around Europe. So about half the member states have never invested in nuclear. Some member states, including my own country, having invested in nuclear, decided to leave that nuclear age behind, and we have succeeded in implementing that just this year. So there's no nuclear power in Germany anymore. Other countries have postponed that transition. And there are also countries that bet on nuclear, like France, for instance, or Hungary, or the Czech Republic. And according to the European division of responsibilities, energy supply issues are not decided on a European level. They are the remit, the responsibility of national authorities. So the European Union doesn't tell either one of its member states, you go nuclear or you leave nuclear behind, you denuclearize. That's a national priority. And as I say, countries have had different attitudes. In the European Parliament, we have never had a full-fledged anti-nuclear majority. So there have always been some decisions with which we have disagreed as Greens because conservative and sometimes also liberal or socialist parties have taken pro-nuclear views. So it's not news that in the European Parliament sometimes nuclear is being advocated, and that will continue to be contentious. And of course, under the present circumstances, this is a particularly controversial conversation because Europe had to decouple from Russian fossil energy supplies very fast.
Yeah.
That was an unfortunate situation. We had warned against that state of dependency that hampered Germany in particular. When Chancellor Merkel, the previous chancellor of our country, came into office in 2005, we had 35% of our gas supply from Russia.
Wow.
When she left office in 2021, after 16 years, that percentage had risen to 55%.
Whoa.
And then because of the war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, there was a policy decision to phase out that dependency.
Okay.
And of course that put a lot of strain on all policymakers, and some believe now that maybe making concessions on the nuclear front might help in the transition. I don't share that view. We don't share that view as Greens, but we don't necessarily command the majority. But I would say the more important development as regards European energy policy is that we have indeed cut the dependency from Russia, which gave Russia leverage over European policy making. It basically created a situation where we made our own countries dependent on an authoritarian regime economically. We've changed that. That is a major achievement, and I think we have also been able to foster more investment into renewables. In Germany, the new government in which we partake as a Green Party has put much more emphasis on the promotion of solar and wind energy and geothermal and also hydrogen. So in that regard, I think you can also describe the situation as one where the transition is being pursued with more ambition than it had been the case for years.
I see. I have further questions for this, because in Taiwan, some pro-nuclear power people keep saying that European Parliament defined nuclear energy as one of the renewable. Is that?
Well, that's not the case. That's just not the case. European Parliament has never said that nuclear is renewable. That's not the case. That's just either a misunderstanding or a lie. I don't care. But even if the European Parliament was stupid enough to say that, that doesn't give anybody a good reason to repeat it. I mean, we have a saying, I grew up on the Rhine River, and we have a nice bridge across the Rhine River where I grew up. And we have a saying that says, if somebody else jumps from the bridge, that's not a reason for you to do it also. And I think if somebody is mistaken about nuclear, that's not a good reason to just share that fallacy.
Got it. Well, from what I heard, actually in European Parliament, there are kind of two groups of people. One is for friends who believe in nuclear, One is for mainly maybe Germany, who believes in renewable energy more, and because of Russia's invasion into Ukraine. Actually, the two groups kind of come to have a consensus and sign a momentum to kind of work together to decrease the reliance on Russians' supply. I don't know if you have any.
I would say that very few Europeans would be happy with the description of the EU as a kind of a Franco-German condominium.
Okay.
All the 27 member states of the EU want to have agency, and they have their own policies. And as I said, it's not the French telling some nations to go nuclear and the Germans saying the opposite. I think what is right, though, is that indeed we have been forced to take measures together because of this need to wean ourselves from the Russian dependency. That has included taking measures that I would not be very proud of. For instance, Germany has built new terminals for liquid gas because we cannot substitute the wide usage of gas completely just by pressing a button, just in one instant. So the transition takes longer than just half a year. That is why we have now banked on importing gas from other sources, but Russia, which is not what we set out to do as Greens. We wanted to use more renewable, but you cannot turn on a heel. That those decisions include path dependencies, and it takes time to overcome that. But indeed, Europe has worked together in that regard, and I think that shows a strong willpower to not let an imperialist Russia dictate to democratic nations in Europe.
Okay. You mentioned that it is not that easy to kind of either persuade citizens to support Greens' decision. And so I would like to connect this topic a little bit to, because we know that you were the former co-convener of Germany Greens. And now, and we also know that Germany Greens or German Greens was in the government like maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and now come back to the government, to the coalition government. And we heard that because it's exactly because of energy issues that the government or the Greens are now facing some challenges. I don't know if you have any point of view or opinions on this, or if you, from your observation, what is happening now in Germany?
Well, maybe I should start with reminding ourselves where we were when we first entered government in 1998. That was a coalition between the Social Democratic Party and us as a junior partner. And during the 7 years in government, we managed to implement two major goals of green policy making. Namely, we managed to agree not only in the government but also with German industry that there would be a nuclear phase-out. That was not conceived of as a step to be taken within a year or two. That was supposed to be a process over 20 years. But we have finally achieved that goal just this year, as I said, but the foundations of that development were laid when we were in government for the first time. The second very important decision with regard to Germany's energy trajectory came when we offered legislation that promoted renewables. The legislation was called a feed-in tariff, and that was later copied by over 50 nations, I believe, and that basically said that we would subsidize the production of renewables energy, which was too expensive in the beginning to be a business case. So when we started promoting solar, for instance, 1 kilowatt hour of solar cost about 40 cents, 40 euro cents. That was way above the cost of fossil energy. Nobody would have done that without subsidy. So we decided to subsidize the development of renewables, and that created a market for renewables, and the development of the market allowed the price of producing renewables to come down. Today, the cost of 1 kilowatt hour for solar is maybe 5 cents. And that is competitive. And I would even claim that the feed-in tariff in Germany was a measure that initiated a broad development towards promoting more renewables around the world. Companies in India or China started producing solar panels because they knew they would be able to sell them in the German market for the German consumption. So I recall visiting India and being welcomed as the father of our jobs because I represented the party that had given that particular Indian company a market for their production. And the same happened with China. So I think those two initiatives that we took as Greens, of course in collaboration with our governing partners and in collaboration with actors from industry, had a major impact. Over the years then, there were, well, I would say a lot of time was lost because conservative-led governments did not share the same level of ambition. So neither with the phase-out, they even tried to reverse the phase-out, and only after the Fukushima catastrophe, they returned to the policy that we had agreed upon 10 years earlier. But also with regard to the promotion of renewables, they really cut down heavily so that Germany lost ground in comparison with other countries. You have more renewables today in Japan, for instance, than you have in Germany. You have much more renewables in China than you have in Germany. So we lost ground there. And the goal of our new participation in government is to reverse that trend, to keep building, for instance, more wind power stations. At the moment, we build 1 wind power station per day.
Per day?
Per day.
Onshore or offshore?
Onshore and offshore together.
Wow.
And the goal of the government is to build 4 stations per day.
Cool.
And we try to implement policies to that end. Or we are trying to implement new policies to promote solar energy, also with new technologies that might be less dependent on silicon as a raw material, so that we could avoid relying on silicon imports from Xinjiang, where the production of polysilicon is tainted by forced labor. And I think this is also the goal against which the Green Party is going to be measured, whether we can deliver in the practical implementation of these very ambitious goals. Overall, I think the environment is much more advantageous today. So throughout society, there is very little opposition against going renewable. And one discussion that has evolved over the last 2 or 3 years is the discussion about hydrogen as a source of energy for, let's say, the steel industry or the chemical industry in order to substitute their dependency on gas.
Okay.
So I have a further question about this. You just mentioned about subsidies. So can I say it's about choice from government? You can choose to give renewable energy, this industry subsidies instead of giving those high energy consuming industry subsidies that encourage people use more renewable. Can we say that?
Well, I don't know enough about your system of government and the policies that governments have implemented in Taiwan so far. So I'm reluctant to say yes or no. I should add, though, that the subsidies that we used to promote renewables were not from the public budget. So those were not subsidies that were paid for from the public coffers. But the additional cost for the promotion of renewables was paid for by the consumers. So every kilowatt hour that anybody consumed around Germany was a little bit more expensive to cover the cost of promoting renewables. That has been very important, I would say, in hindsight, because it made the subsidy scheme independent of annual battles over the budget. Other countries like Spain had subsidized from the public budget, and they realized then that every other year there were pushbacks from other industries or from other ministries that said we need more money for whatever we do, and that created a situation where the financing perspective was less reliable than in our case.
Okay.
So another further questions are talking about the wind farm, windmill. This just out of curiosity, is the onshore wind more popular in Germany or offshore wind? Because in Taiwan it's always debating. So like which one is more advanced or something?
Or maybe some of the animals or biological issues may appear when we're talking about offshore wind
Right.
power.
I don't think I've seen a poll that has asked that question, but I know that there has been a lot of opposition against onshore wind in some conservative states
Is there any
of
reason?
our country. Well, you can't expect me to defend conservative arguments that have never convinced me, but I think that some of these so-called arguments were excuses that just were meant to cover up the lobby opposition against renewable alternatives. So I would not necessarily take that too seriously on substance, but more recently that has been overcome. In some of we have 16 federal states in Germany, and in some of these federal states the Greens are governing together with the Conservatives. And we have always made it a condition in these coalition agreements that the door would be opened for renewables. So I think we are overcoming that kind of opposition. Similarly, there were issues between fishermen and the wind industry with regard to offshore wind. Some of these issues were settled through agreements. I believe that such opposition has to be taken seriously, and if you just try to ignore it, to overrule it, that will not be a successful policy, because people want to have their point of view respected. And even if you don't agree with them, you have to respect it, and you have to provide an argument, and you should not just ignore it. On the other hand, selfish interests must not be allowed to block future-oriented developments. And for instance, in the case of Taiwan, I have been told that the development of wind energy in Taiwan could be much more advanced if there were not some local content provisions which are proving to be impediments to the development of the industry. And I've even heard from European investors that were willing to invest in promoting wind in Taiwan, that they withdrew from the market and went elsewhere because they felt that elsewhere they were more welcome, and here their business was not going to be successful because of those local content provisions, some of which seem to have been promoted by local lobby groups, including fishermen.
Yes.
I think that is up to the government to deal with that, but just giving in is not a better solution than just ignoring. I think in some cases we have been able to overcome opposition, local opposition against the development of wind energy, because we allowed the communities to benefit. For instance, if you have a company that is headquartered in, I don't know, Munich, and they are building windmills on the German coast, they pay their taxes in Munich. So the local community doesn't benefit. There is additional business, but the taxes are not paid there. But if you change the tax law so that the place where you put up the wind farm benefits from the tax revenue, that might change the perspective of the locals.
Yeah.
So I think there are ways of dealing with that.
So I believe you have some experiences of dealing with these cases
Yes.
locally.
That's true. That was always a problem between the offshore wind companies and local fishing industries. But I think, as you just mentioned, it's all about like how could we share the benefits from this, like why like local people who really has like an influence by build up the windmill like right next to their house. They don't really get that much money from that, but their life, their daily life is they saw like a huge windmill like in front of them or something like that. Some fishermen says, well, that will completely kill their job because the wind farm is right on their fishing site. So it's always like a pulling between the fishing industry and especially those like individuals, not big companies and those.
Maybe I should send our Minister of Economic Affairs and Climate from Berlin, because when he was still a minister in the state of Schleswig-Holstein, he was a minister for the environment there, and he had to deal with fishing industry opposition against the development of wind industry, and he negotiated a truce between the two sides that made both sides happy. So maybe either I send him or maybe somebody comes to Germany to collect some of his experience.
To ask for his help.
That sounds like decent. Like that sounds like a good idea because like this problem exists for years. When I was still like when I was younger, working in that industry, I heard a lot of this. I won't say conflict, but disagreement.
Well, I would suspect that if such problems persist for longer than they should, it may also be an indicator that there is some political and economic complacency. That people don't see the imperative need to move forward. Now, under the framework conditions in which we operate today, I think energy independence is a huge issue. I don't know the exact figures, but somebody told me that Taiwan still relies a lot on imported fossil energy, and that the reserves that Taiwan holds is sufficient for maybe a period of 2 weeks. So if the reliability of supply would be at all challenged from whichever side, that would make Taiwan very vulnerable. The more you can develop your domestic energy sources, the less vulnerable you will be. In the German conversation, I think there was 3 stages in our discussion of renewables. First stage, it helps the climate. Well, that convinced a lot of people, but not everybody. Second stage, it helps the climate and it helps transforming the economy. That added some more voices. And the third stage is it helps the climate, it helps the economy, and it helps the national security because it makes us less dependent on third sources. And that is an experience that has been hit home just over the last year and a half since the Russians started their aggression in Ukraine. So maybe like a tripod that stands very stably on 3 legs, those 3 arguments in favor of renewables together can convince a lot of people.
I want to add on the number of like as almost around like what I read as around 98% of our energy are imported. So which means that we're extremely vulnerable. My personal perspective. I think Taiwan on energy, this perspective, we're really vulnerable because if we cannot just have like self-sufficiency on the energy issue, that will be always a problem. So this gives those nuclear supporters saying, because we rely on imported energy so heavily, so we need nuclear as a...
Well, let me just try to make 3 arguments with regard to nuclear, practical arguments. Number 1, where do you get the nuclear fuels from? You don't have it domestically. In Europe, most of the nuclear fuels come from Russia. So it's not necessarily a good idea to substitute fossil dependency with nuclear dependency. Second, what do you do to guarantee cooling of the nuclear plants? France, for instance, relies on the water from their rivers. But as we have global warming, there have been many cases where the rivers were so warm that they could not provide enough cooling capacity for the nuclear plants. So several nuclear plants in France had to be shut down or had to reduce their production, and France had to rely on energy imports from Germany, from our renewables, to help out with nuclear. And the third question is, what do you do with spent fuels? There are some startups that promise that they will be able to solve the problems of spent fuels and make it possible that spent fuels will be dealt with in over a time period that we could responsibly deal with. But so far, all the technologies that we have, until that new argument is proven, all the technologies that we have so far make it imperative that those spent fuels would be stored safely for several hundreds of years. No, several hundred thousands of years. Nobody knows whether there's any real chance to guarantee those conditions. And of course you could dream of using nuclear and exporting your spent fuels, but how could that be a morally acceptable argument, that you benefit but you put the burden of it on somebody else? That would be a colonialist point of view. So I think there are very important practical issues with nuclear, and that's not talking about the risks of running the plants. And Taiwan is an island that has an experience with some earthquake activities, and I don't think that nuclear and earthquake matches well.
No, definitely
Totally
not.
not.
And talking about spent nuclear fuel, one of the nuclear power plants, they were facing like they don't have enough storage space for that. They put in a pool. So the solution they were providing was they just rearrange those used nuclear bars that could fit in more, which is extremely not safe for that. So of course this promotion wasn't passed, but that's even the idea they try to solve the problem to make that nuclear power plant could run longer.
Look, let me put it very simply. I'm a green and not a blue. And I don't support nuclear.
All right. How about we kind of Maybe I would like to ask some question more about your observation on for the past decades, because I believe different every 10 or 20 years, our voters, their ideology or their attitude toward Greens may change, and because of climate change or because of there are war or battles. I don't know, from your observation, as a Green, when you want to kind of persuade more people to vote Greens, what strategies can be used and what kind of strategies no longer is useful anymore, and what are more attractive to new voters? Is there any experiences you'd like to share with us?
In the German case, trust in Green politics grew from the grassroots. Greens were first elected to local office before we played any relevant role in one of our federal states or on the national level. And I think it made a difference for citizens to realize my neighbor is a Green, but this Green neighbor, she cares or he cares, and they're not just any outlandish ideologues. They're people like you and me, and they are reliable. You can trust them. So trust is built from the grassroots, I think, and you cannot parachute trust into a population. That doesn't work. And you cannot preach trust. Trust has to be won. And that takes a while. So in the state where I started working with the Greens in Baden-Württemberg, Greens were first elected to Parliament in 1980. We remained an opposition party until 2011. And in 2011, a Green was elected governor of the state. That means for 30 years, voters watched us very closely. For 30 years, and that's a conservative population, I would say. One of the most conservative states around Germany. And voters were not giving us easy credit. They observed very closely whether we merited their trust. And the leader, who is still the prime minister to this day, so he's been in office now for 12 years, he is a person who stands out. He's always lived in the countryside. He is a devout Catholic, and he says that publicly. He is very approachable, so he is not a remote figure. He's with the people. They have a club or an association in the village where he lives. They have an association where they do shooting exercises. Who is the best sharpshooter in the village?
Wow.
And he won twice. Yeah. So I mean, he is integrated with the local culture. At the same time, now and then he quotes ancient Greek philosophers. So I mean, he's quite a character. Yeah. He is more conservative than the average Green, and he gained their trust. And he also gained the trust because he often contradicted his own party. So he was not the party soldier who would always march in lockstep. When he felt that the party was making a mistake, he said it publicly. So people began to trust that this person acts on the basis of their own conscience, of their own knowledge, of their own understanding, and listen to different voices. So I think that captures well how you develop trust. And also, I recall negative examples where green activists acted arrogantly vis-a-vis local populations, acted as if they were supposed to teach everybody a lesson or two per day,
Per day.
Per day. Well, it's a lot.
and look down on the local population. And presented green ideas as representing a necessity to break with all the traditions. We create a completely new world, and that will be 100% green. Nobody likes that. In Baden-Württemberg, the population is considered parsimonious. Some people say stingy. So they don't want to spend a lot of money. Yeah, their savings rate is above the average. So that used to be a very poor state. So from tradition, from history, they learned that being parsimonious is being cautious. So Greens in that state never fell for the socialist approach of promising overspending. Some reformists, including some Greens, would advocate, well, if there's a need for a new green policy, let's spend more. And then people say, wait a minute, who's going to pay for that? So we chose a policy that says we will promote green policies, but we will balance that because we will cut some other spending that's not useful. That was acceptable. And then this governor made another argument. He said, look, you have learned from your forefathers that you should be parsimonious with regard to the money. I tell you, apply the same lesson to the environment. You have to be parsimonious also with the environment. You don't want to waste money. You should not be wasteful with the environment either. Because if you waste the environment today, what will be left for your kids, for your grandkids? That was an argument that people understood because it respected their traditions and applied the best traditions to the new circumstances. And I think that is important. That are some elements where I think you have to make a very conscientious decision how you approach people. When you're just a missionary, believing that you shouldn't listen, you should just talk, people don't feel respected. And also, sometimes Greens develop the habit of not answering the questions they're being asked, but giving the answers that they know. So they know an answer about energy policy, maybe, but the question is about the social implication. And if they don't give an answer as regards the social implication, well, nobody feels respected, and people feel that maybe the policy has not been thought through. If you are asked whether that helps the development of the economy and you don't have an answer, you just say imperative because of the climate, people say, wait a minute, I have asked about the economy. I would say you can make a very strong argument that environmental policies help developing the economy, but you must make it. And you must answer the question that you're being asked and not just give the answers that you know by coincidence.
Got it. So how about we bring the question from local Germany a little bit broader to Europe. So would you also give us some of your point of view on, because I know that there is a Greens Federation on Freedom Alliance and Greens, and you have worked together in Parliament. So when there are issues about climate change or about energy or any other green issues, when you have to deal with other parties from different places on the political spectrum, would you share a little bit about your experience when you have to work? When you are working with other Greens from other countries? Is there anything interesting, or is there anything challenging to share?
First of all, presently, the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament is stronger than it has ever been in the past. In the last European elections of 2019, we got on the pan-EU average 10% of the vote, which was a momentous success. When I say Greens/EFA, that represents an alliance of two groups, the Greens group, and then EFA group is another alliance of regionalist parties. So for instance, in the northwest of Spain, there's Galicia. They elect members of the European Parliament on regionalist lists. Or Catalonia, the same. Or we used to have, before the Brexit, we used to have Scottish members also elected on regionalist lists. And we have cooperated between those two groups for many, many years. And on all the matters of principle, we have agreed, but the regionalists have some very specific issues, like language issues, promoting the usage of minority languages, for instance. That's one core issue. Cultural issues are very important for them. So, talking now about the Green part, which is by far the bigger part, we have 73 members, I think, at the moment. And of those, 10% are from the regionalists. And a few other members are from small parties like the Pirate Party. And some other small parties that would not be able to create a group of their own, so they join with us. And I think it's a great testament of trust that they joined the Green group, because they joined us because they felt we were fair with small parties.
And inclusive?
Yes. So the vast majority is Green members. The biggest delegation in our group is from Germany, where we elected 21 German Greens in 2019. This is a huge group. That we have several French, we have 3 Dutch, we have 3 Finnish. From some countries we have just 1 or 2, and there is still a majority of member states where we have none. So it's not a very balanced picture. We are strong in the northwest, and particularly in Germany, but we're pretty weak in the east and in big parts of the south. More recently, the European Green Party, which is the alliance of all those national Green parties, has grown new membership. in the Baltic countries, for instance, and we hope to enlarge the representation in the next European Parliament. Now, as regards the second part of your question, how we cooperate with others, I think I should first explain a very specific character of the European Parliament. The level of cooperation beyond party borders in the European Parliament is exceptional, I would say. I served for 2 legislative periods in the State Parliament of Baden-Württemberg. I was the spokesperson for financial and budgetary affairs, and I had, I dare say, a very good image. I was very well respected. But in 8 years, I won only 1 vote. And I still recall that the finance minister, who was my opposite part, came after one meeting to me and said, "I don't get it. You're always so energetic when you offer your proposals. You must know full well that we will vote everything down." That was my experience. When I came to the European Parliament, an advisor to the Green Group took me aside and said, "Look, just to let you know how we operate here, if you have a very good reason to oppose a proposal from another party, you can of course do so. But normally we try to find consensus, to work together." And that is my experience in the European Parliament. All the successes that I have had personally have been possible because I found colleagues from other political groups that would team up, that would share the initiative. So this is a very strong tradition of the European Parliament, and I think it stems from the experience that the European Parliament, when it was first elected directly from the voters in 1979, it had almost no powers. So only by standing together, the European Parliament managed to gain some powers. And today it's a much more powerful body, but that came about because the European Parliament managed to be united on important issues. And some of that has been waning. Some of that has been lost because of extremist groups from the radical right, also from the radical left, that don't follow the same kind of logic. But there is still quite some measure. And we try to play a constructive role. But sometimes that's also controversial within our own group. And that is because not all Green parties are just the same. So to give you a very innocent example, we once had a very controversial debate over rail policy. In Germany, the rail network is public. But there are different private companies that compete in serving the citizens using the rail network. We say it has to be public because it's a natural monopoly, but it is better to have competition, because if you have a monopolist serving the people, they will just ignore a lot of needs. In France and in Belgium, the network is also in public hands, but they also have a monopoly in serving the citizens. So one company. We couldn't agree, because in the German context, we were unable to just say, okay, we give up on this attitude, because this is what we have found the best solution. And the French and the Belgians wouldn't give up on their attitude either. So we ended up voting differently on that issue. And that rarely ever happens in the national parliament. Normally you have very strict discipline, but in the European Parliament there is no such discipline being enforced in our Green Group. So if I feel that I cannot vote with the majority, I'm expected to say it, but then I'm allowed to vote my own conscience. So that's, in a way, it's liberal and cooperative, and this gives quite a few opportunities. As an individual member of the European Parliament, I think you have more leverage than you would have as an individual member of a national parliament.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your sharing. And actually, time goes by very fast.
Can I have a very last
Sure,
question?
please.
I would like to, sorry for wasting everybody's time, but I'm really curious. I would like to jump back to your visit to the Doublethink Lab. And is that about information operation issues? Yep. I would like to jump back to this topic a bit, because this issue becomes a problem, especially our younger generations, like people under 25. There were over 38% of younger people are using TikTok, and they're heavy users. So that Chinese government could easily to influence or manipulate the ideology or the public opinion by controlling the algorithm of TikTok. That I noticed that it's because my younger colleagues, they were starting using the term, like Chinese term, like a 中国 Taiwan, like Taiwan, but Chinese Taiwan. I was like, excuse me, why you're using this term? Where some shipping instead of like a video, like the translation of those terms. And they were like, oh, it's from TikTok, where like they're singing weird songs I never heard about. So that becomes an issue about of the influence operation or information operation from China. So I don't know, like, how could we survive? Or we're fully aware on that, but I feel hopeless. Or
Well, no, I would not feel hopeless, but we certainly cannot be complacent. The regime in Beijing is a totalitarian dictatorship that respects no rule of law, respects no other nation, and has far-reaching hegemonic ambitions. They're not just oppressive internally, domestically, with all the human rights atrocities that they commit in Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and so forth, but they're also aggressive vis-a-vis neighboring countries. They have developed a policy of economic coercion that they have employed against Australia, Japan, Korea, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, Sweden, Norway, and many, many other countries, including Taiwan. They have also employed it vis-a-vis Taiwan. So they're not to be trusted. And they want to project their interests and their orientation also overseas. One bitter example of that has come with the imposition of the so-called national security law of Hong Kong, where paragraph 38 says that whoever wherever they live in the world, whichever country they're a citizen of, whoever utters opinions that John Lee and his criminal accomplices don't like, you can be prosecuted under Hong Kong law. And the PRC has been creating police stations overseas, in the US, in Europe, other countries too. So I don't think you can trust. Because of that, you have to find measures that push back against their illegitimate interference. And I see three elements. One is the so-called United Front policy, where they try to use measures of elite capture to influence public opinion and decision making in other countries. The second is control over sensitive infrastructure. For instance, using Huawei as an element of the rollout of 5G networks. Every Chinese citizen and every Chinese company is obliged by law in the PRC to hand over any data that they can get hold of to the services of the regime. So it's not safe to allow control over sensitive infrastructure. That's the second point. And the third point is in the field of what they call FIMI, foreign interference and malign influence. And that's what organizations like Doublethink Lab work with. And I think the particular strength of Taiwan in this regard lies in the fact that there is a very strong civic engagement. And I think that's important because I would be somewhat uneasy if the government would control all of that. I think this is a particular responsibility of civil society to defend the free space. And I was quite impressed by how these groups create an environment, a potent environment, and I think we can learn a lot from that. And I was also impressed, I must say, and I think other members of our delegation just the same, when we met with Audrey Tang, and she explained to us how she saw that. And I found one sentence very interesting that she said. She said, "I'm not working for the Taiwan government, I'm working with the Taiwan government." I found that a very interesting note.
All right, so for our last part, is there any words you'd like to share with either Taiwanese who is concerned about the crisis between China and Asia Pacific, and other parties for our Green supporters and Green Party members? Is there any wishes or any words you would like to share or any encouragement you would like to give us?
Maybe I would share one advice that the Dalai Lama once gave me. He once told me, keep your determination, but with more patience. I think determination is needed, but you also need a long breath. You cannot be impatient, and you cannot pull on the grass to make it grow faster. So I think you have to have the right balance of determination and patience, and maybe to balance it, self-criticism is very important to learn from your mistakes. Not being afraid of making mistakes, being afraid rather of not making mistakes, but of course not repeating the same mistakes all the time. Albert Einstein once said, it's not smart to think that by repeating the same mistake over and over again you will succeed. That applies also to green policy making. As regards the broader picture, I think, and that was part of our message when we came here as a European Parliament delegation, the number of friends of Taiwan around the world is increasing. Taiwan is not being more isolated, Taiwan is being less isolated. And I would say 5 years ago, Taiwan was almost not on the radar screen in many European countries. That has changed considerably. The European Parliament has been a driver in that regard, but other institutions have joined. If you compare the policy that the German government adopted, they just published a new China strategy. You can go and read it, it's online, and you will find that it deals with Taiwan in a quite interesting way and offers a lot of options for collaboration with Taiwan. So that signals that also on the level of member states there is change. And what I think is also important is that the perception of Taiwan is not the perception of a weak, dependent island that clamors for support, but the perception is of a partner that brings valuable contributions to the table so that we can partner together for commonly shared goals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Because of the time limit and MEP Bütikofer, actually he has to go to the airport later, and we are very grateful that he still squeezed some time out for us and to give us very interesting opinions on a variety of issues. And it's very glad that we can also exchange our ideas on several different issues. So I believe that the live stream will end here now, and then we'll have a short break. And thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.
投绿党，正马上投绿党。
好的，谢谢线上的观众。那我们就是这一次的直播就要在这边结束了。那大家也可以感受出来，我们就是第一次如此的有趣的一个直播经验啦。如果有不完美的地方，请大家多包涵。有没有觉得我们台湾绿党真的很诚实？好，那就这样子哦。已经 OK 了吗 ？OK， 好，
谢谢。
Thank you, and our friends. 你要拿进来 ，OK。Actually, we will have a very short tea break.